It was late evening, and the city streets were already quiet. A thin mist hung in the air as the soft glow of the streetlights reflected on the damp pavement. In a small apartment at the edge of town, a single father sat at a wooden table with his little girl. The room was modest, just a small couch, an old dining table, and a bookshelf filled with worn-out books, some of which he had found in thrift stores or taken from boxes left on sidewalks. Though the furniture was simple, the warmth in that home was undeniable. The little girl's laughter filled the air as her father patiently flipped through a book, helping her pronounce a new word. Life had never been easy for him. He had lost his wife years ago, leaving him to raise his daughter alone. He worked long hours as a janitor, cleaning offices and hallways late into the night. His job was exhausting, and sometimes he came home with sore feet and tired eyes. But none of that mattered when he saw his daughter smile. She was his reason to keep going, his only source of strength. His daughter was not like other children. Even at a very young age, she had an incredible ability to absorb information. When she first started speaking, she quickly picked up words in her native language, and soon after, she surprised her father by repeating words she heard from the neighbors in another tongue. Instead of watching cartoons or playing games all day, she loved listening to stories in different languages and asking endless questions about the world. Her father noticed her talent early on, and though they didn't have money for fancy classes, he made it his mission to help her grow. Every night, after coming home from work, he would sit with her at that old table and teach her. He didn't have much, but he used whatever resources he could find: old language books, second-hand dictionaries, free online videos, and even conversations with people he met at his job. If he overheard someone speaking a language he didn't know, he would politely ask them for a few phrases and write them down. Slowly, over the years, he built his own little library of words and phrases in different languages. The little girl absorbed everything like a sponge. By the age of 8, she could hold basic conversations in several languages, something even her teachers couldn't believe. But to her father, this was only the beginning. He believed education was the key to changing her future, and he refused to let their poverty hold her back. He often told her, "We may not have money, but we have something more powerful than that: knowledge. No one can take that away from you." Their life was full of sacrifices. While other children wore new clothes every school year, she wore hand-me-downs. Her father often skipped meals to make sure she had enough to eat. He took extra shifts, sometimes working through the night, and slept only a few hours before walking her to school in the morning. Yet he never complained. Every time he saw her proudly reading a new book or surprising him with a phrase in another language, all his exhaustion disappeared. She was his light in a world that had often been dark. Though they lived in a poor neighborhood, their home was filled with love and encouragement. He wanted his daughter to grow up knowing that her dreams were valid, no matter how big they seemed. She often told him she wanted to travel the world and meet people from every country. He would smile and say, "One day you will, my little star. One day they will know your name." But the world outside their small apartment wasn't always kind. People often looked down on him because of his job. He remembered a time when a parent at his daughter's school mocked him for being a janitor. The comment stung, but he stayed quiet. What mattered to him was that his daughter was happy and safe. He didn't care about status or wealth. All he wanted was to raise a kind and intelligent human being who would one day have opportunities he never had. In the evenings, after dinner, they had a little routine. She would sit on his lap or next to him at the table, and he would point at a word in one of their books. She would repeat it carefully, sometimes giggling when she mispronounced it. Then she would teach him new words she had learned at school, proudly showing off her memory. They would laugh together, and he would feel a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Those quiet evenings became the foundation of their bond. Sometimes, when he walked her to school in the morning, he would notice how other parents arrived in expensive cars, wearing designer clothes. They barely noticed him. But when his daughter hugged him tightly before running off to class, it made him feel like the richest man in the world. He always believed that talent has no limits, no matter where you come from. That's why he worked so hard not just to survive, but to give his daughter the tools to change her future. There were nights when he could barely keep his eyes open as he helped her study. There were days when his hands were rough and sore from scrubbing floors. But when he heard her speak fluently in a language he didn't even understand, pride washed over him like sunlight. The little girl didn't fully understand the sacrifices her father was making for her yet. She only knew that he loved her deeply and always encouraged her to keep learning. "You're special," he would whisper to her at night before she fell asleep. Never forget that. She would smile sleepily, hug him tightly, and drift off to dreams filled with distant lands and voices speaking in different languages. Little did they know, their quiet life was about to change forever. Their story, which had so far been full of struggles and sacrifices, would soon lead them to an encounter that would change both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains of their tiny apartment, casting soft golden light across the room. The father had barely slept the night before, but he was already dressed in his worn uniform, carefully ironing his shirt to make it look neat. His daughter sat at the table, swinging her legs as she ate a simple breakfast of bread and tea. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Baba, can I come with you today?" she asked softly. He paused. Normally, he didn't like taking her to work. The places he cleaned were full of wealthy people who wouldn't understand their life. But she was on a short school break, and he couldn't afford a babysitter. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded with a gentle smile. "All right, but you have to promise to stay close to me, okay?" She nodded eagerly, her face lighting up. That afternoon, they set out together. He held her tiny hand as they walked to the bus stop. She skipped along happily, humming a little tune, completely unaware of how different their world was from the one they were about to step into. His shift that day was at a luxurious hotel in the heart of the city. The building was massive, its glass doors polished to perfection, and its marble floors shining like mirrors. Expensive cars lined the front entrance, and staff in crisp uniforms moved quickly to serve the guests. The little girl's eyes widened in amazement as they walked inside. She had never seen anything like it before. "Stay close, my star," her father whispered, holding her hand tightly. She nodded, clutching the small book she had brought with her. He got straight to work, sweeping and mopping the ballroom floor while setting up chairs for an evening event. The little girl quietly sat in a corner, her big eyes taking in the glittering chandeliers and elegant decorations. The air smelled of fresh flowers, and soft music played in the background. She was fascinated but stayed quiet, just like her father had asked. As the hours passed, wealthy guests began arriving for a private gathering. Men in tailored suits and women in sparkling dresses filled the room, laughing and chatting in different languages. The little girl listened intently, recognizing words here and there. Her ears perked up whenever she heard a language she knew, and she whispered translations to herself like a secret game. Her father tried to stay invisible, cleaning quietly in the background. He didn't want anyone to notice him. He was used to blending in. But that day, fate had other plans. Among the guests was a man who immediately stood out. He carried himself with confidence, his suit perfectly fitted, his shoes polished like glass. People whispered his name with respect. He was a wealthy businessman from abroad, someone known for his power and pride. He had a sharp gaze, the kind that could make anyone feel small, and a cold smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The man glanced around the ballroom, and his gaze fell on the janitor working in the corner. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Who lets a man like that clean during an important meeting?" he muttered to one of his associates in Arabic, his voice low but sharp. He assumed no one around him could understand. But the little girl heard him. She understood every word. She looked at her father, who was crouched on the floor polishing a table leg, completely unaware of the comment. Her tiny hands tightened around her book. She felt a rush of anger. Why would someone talk about her father like that? He worked so hard every day, and yet people like this man didn't see it. The businessman's attention shifted to the girl. "And he even brought his child," he said, chuckling softly, still in Arabic. "Does he think this is a playground?" The little girl's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to defend her father, But she hesitated. She was shy, and she wasn't sure if she should speak up. Just then, her father noticed the man looking at them. He lowered his head respectfully and whispered to his daughter, "Stay close, my star. We'll be done soon." But the businessman wasn't done. He walked over, towering above them. "You work here?" he asked, switching to English. "Yes, sir," the father said politely, standing straight despite his exhaustion. The man's cold smile widened. "And you bring your daughter? How interesting." He glanced at the girl again, as if she were out of place in this luxurious setting. The little girl lowered her gaze, but inside, something stirred. She had never liked when people looked down on her father. He was the hardest working man she knew, and she admired him more than anyone. The businessman chuckled and turned back to his associates, switching languages again. "Poor man. This is what happens when you have no ambition." His words were sharp, almost mocking, and the people around him laughed quietly. The little girl's cheeks burned. She understood every word. For the first time in her life, she felt a strange courage rising in her chest. She closed her book, stood up, and took a step forward. The ballroom was filled with soft chatter and laughter, but for the little girl, everything had gone quiet. Her heart beat fast as she looked up at the tall man who had just mocked her father. She had always been shy around strangers, but this moment felt different. Something inside her told her she couldn't stay silent. She took a deep breath, straightened her tiny shoulders, and looked directly at the man. In perfect Arabic, her gentle voice rang out, "It is not nice to laugh at people who work hard. My father is not poor. He is rich in heart." The words echoed in the room, catching the man off guard. Conversations around them stopped as people turned to look at the brave little girl standing so firmly in front of him. The businessman blinked, stunned. He had spoken in Arabic, assuming no one in this place, especially not a child, would understand. His smile faltered, and a hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Then, with a smirk, he switched languages. "Oh, so you know a little Arabic? Impressive. But can you understand this?" he asked in flawless French, his tone dripping with condescension. The girl's eyes lit up with confidence. Without hesitation, she replied in perfect French, "Yes, I can. And it is still not nice to laugh at others." Gasps filled the room. A few guests exchanged surprised glances, whispering to one another. The man's smirk faded slightly, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Switching to Italian, he said, "And what about this language, little one? Do you know this one too?" The girl smiled shyly and responded in smooth Italian, "Yes, signore. I know this one too. Would you like me to say it in another language?" This time, the room erupted with soft laughter, not at her, but at him. Guests who moments ago had been amused by his arrogance were now impressed by her boldness. Even the hotel staff paused in their work to listen, their eyes wide with admiration. The businessman felt his face flush. He hadn't expected this, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. He switched to Mandarin, his words sharp and precise, hoping this would be the language that left her speechless. But she wasn't. She responded with confidence, her soft voice carrying flawless Mandarin tones that rolled off her tongue effortlessly. Now the entire room fell silent. The man's cold smile completely disappeared, replaced by disbelief. He stared at her, as if trying to understand how this tiny girl from such a humble background could speak so many languages fluently. Her father, standing behind her, was frozen. He had always known his daughter was special, but this moment left even him in awe. He had no idea she had learned so much, so quickly. The businessman stepped closer, his voice quieter now, almost soft. How do you know all of this?" he asked in English. The little girl turned her head and looked at her father. With a proud smile, she said, "Because my father taught me. He teaches me every night after work. He says learning is more powerful than money." There was a collective gasp from the guests. Some of them lowered their heads, ashamed of how they had been laughing moments ago. The little girl's words had struck something deep within the man, something he hadn't felt in a long time. For years, he had surrounded himself with wealth and status, convinced that success was measured by money. Yet here was a child, wearing a simple dress and holding an old book, speaking to him in multiple languages and defending her father with courage and grace. He felt something shift inside him. The laughter he had started earlier had vanished completely. In its place was a strange silence, heavy with respect. The businessman slowly knelt down so he could be at her eye level. "You are a very smart little girl," he said softly. "Your father must be very proud." She looked at her father, who had tears in his eyes, and nodded. "He is. And I'm proud of him too." The room seemed to pause in that moment. Guests who moments ago were sipping champagne and making small talk now watched in awe as this little girl, so small and humble, had brought a powerful man to silence. The businessman straightened himself and glanced at the father, his eyes no longer cold but thoughtful. Something about this encounter was stirring memories he had long buried, of his own humble beginnings, of the days when he too had faced mockery before he became successful. And though he didn't say it out loud for the first time in years, he felt humbled. The ballroom felt different now. A few minutes ago, laughter had bounced off the polished walls, champagne glasses clinked, and the atmosphere was filled with careless luxury. But now, silence lingered like a soft blanket, broken only by the faint hum of background music. All eyes were on the little girl who had just spoken with such confidence and grace, and on the man who stood before her, no longer wearing his arrogant smile. The businessman's sharp gaze softened as he looked at the child holding her old, worn-out book. She stood so proudly, her small shoulders straight, her chin lifted, yet there was no hint of rudeness in her voice, only truth. He had spent his life surrounded by people who flattered him, people who spoke to impress. But here was a little girl who spoke from her heart, without fear. Her father shifted uneasily, unsure what would happen next. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder, silently wishing they could disappear before things went wrong. He wasn't used to attention. All he ever wanted was to do his work quietly and go home. But tonight, fate had other plans. The man crouched slightly to meet the girl's eyes again. His voice was no longer mocking. It was calm, curious. "You know so many languages. How old are you?" She hesitated for a moment before answering softly. 8. 8, he repeated, almost to himself. He studied her for a moment, then glanced at her father, who stood with quiet dignity, still wearing his janitor's uniform. The man's eyes softened further. "You taught her all of this?" The father cleared his throat nervously. I try," he said humbly. "I do what I can. She learns quickly." The man straightened and looked around the room. The guests, still watching intently, shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided his gaze, ashamed of their earlier laughter. The silence felt heavy with realization. This wasn't just a poor man and his daughter. This was a story unfolding right before their eyes, a story of resilience and love. The businessman turned back to the little girl. "Say something in another language," he asked gently. She nodded, flipping through the small book in her hands. She looked up and spoke in flawless German, reciting a poem about hope that she had memorized. Her soft, clear voice carried through the room, and even those who didn't understand the words felt their meaning. The man's expression changed again. He was no longer looking at a child. He was looking at a miracle. When she finished, there was silence for a moment. Then a soft clap from somewhere in the back. Slowly, more people joined in, clapping not out of politeness, but genuine admiration. The little girl blushed and lowered her head shyly, stepping closer to her father. The man cleared his throat and spoke again, this time to her father. "You should be very proud of her. She's exceptional." The father's eyes welled up with tears, though he tried to hide them. "I am," he said softly. "She's my whole world." The man studied him for a long moment. He noticed the weariness in his eyes, the roughness of his hands, and the humility in his posture. It was clear this was a man who had worked hard all his life, not for himself, but for his child. Something inside the businessman shifted. He thought back to his own childhood, growing up in a small home with nothing but dreams and determination. He remembered the long hours his parents had worked to give him an education. Somewhere along the way, he had become so focused on his wealth and success that he had forgotten those beginnings. Now, looking at this father and daughter, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: respect. He turned to the little girl and knelt down again, his tone warm. "Your father must be a very good teacher," he said. The girl smiled proudly. "He is the best," she replied. That simple answer hit him harder than he expected. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked around at the guests who were still watching. "This little girl has more intelligence and courage than most of us here," he said firmly. "And her father is doing something far greater than we realize." Whispers rippled through the crowd, and several people nodded in agreement. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. Where there had once been condescension, there was now admiration. The man took a deep breath and looked back at the father. "Would you both come to my office tomorrow?" he asked, his voice steady but kind. The father blinked in surprise, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Your office," he repeated. "Yes," the man said with a small smile. "I'd like to talk about her future." The little girl looked up at her father, her eyes wide with excitement. But he only nodded cautiously, unsure if this was truly an opportunity or just another moment of mockery. Still, there was something sincere in the man's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. The father hesitated, then said softly, "We'll come." The man gave a respectful nod, then turned back to his guests, who were still buzzing about what they had witnessed. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, too, had just been changed by a little girl's courage. The father gently squeezed his daughter's hand, whispering, "You were so brave." She smiled up at him, unaware of how deeply her words and her gift had just touched one of the most powerful men in the room. That night, as they left the grand hotel and stepped back into their quiet, humble world, neither of them realized that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The next morning, the father woke up earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been racing all night, replaying the events from a hotel. He couldn't believe what had happened. His little girl had stood in front of a powerful man and stunned him with her talent. And now they were invited to his office. He didn't know what to expect. Part of him worried it was just politeness, maybe even pity. But there was something in that man's eyes last night, something genuine. It had been years since someone had looked at him with respect rather than judgment. That look stayed with him. He dressed in his cleanest clothes, ironing his shirt twice to get every crease out, even though it was still faded from years of wear. His daughter wore her favorite dress, a simple blue one with tiny flowers. She held her little book tightly as they walked out the door, her small hand in his. The city felt different today. The streets bustled with cars and people, but to them, it felt like they were walking toward a new chapter of life. When they arrived at the office building, they both froze for a moment. It was taller than anything she had ever seen, its glass windows gleaming under the morning sun. Inside, everything was spotless and grand. A receptionist greeted them politely, and moments later, they were escorted to the top floor. The father held his daughter's hand a little tighter as they entered a large, elegant office. The man from the hotel stood by the window, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the city skyline. He turned when they entered, and this time there was no arrogance in his expression. He smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," he said, motioning for them to sit. The father hesitated for a moment, unsure if they belonged in a place like this. But he took a deep breath and guided his daughter to the chair. She sat quietly, her wide eyes taking in the bookshelves that lined the walls, the polished desk, and the soft leather chairs. "I thought about you both all night," the man began. "Your daughter is extraordinary. Her talent is rare, but even more rare is the dedication I see in you." The father shifted nervously. "She's very smart," he said softly. I try my best." The man leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "You've done more than your best. You've given her something money can't buy: love, patience, and the drive to learn. Most children with every resource in the world still don't speak 9 languages. That says everything about the kind of father you are." The father blinked, stunned. Compliments like that were foreign to him. He wasn't used to praise. He had spent years feeling invisible. His daughter squeezed his hand under the table, smiling proudly at him. The man took a deep breath and continued, I want to help. Not out of pity, please don't think that. But because your daughter deserves every opportunity in the world. And I can give her that. The father's eyes widened. Help how? The man's voice was steady, filled with sincerity. I want to sponsor her education. She deserves to study at the best international schools, to have access to the best teachers and resources. I'll cover everything, school fees, books, even transportation. And I'd also like to help you, so you won't have to work so many exhausting hours. You should be able to focus on guiding her, not just surviving. The father's throat tightened. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had spent years cleaning floors, skipping meals, and sacrificing everything he had just to give his daughter a chance. And now this man, a man who once mocked him, was offering her the future he had always dreamed of but never thought possible. I don't know what to say, the father whispered, his voice trembling. Say yes, the man said gently, smiling. Tears welled in the father's eyes. He looked down at his daughter, who was beaming with excitement but also clutching his arm nervously, unsure if it was real. Baba, she whispered softly, is it okay? He wiped his eyes and nodded. Yes, my star, it's okay. The man stood and walked over to them. He knelt down in front of the little girl, looking into her bright, curious eyes. You are very special, he told her. One day, you will do great things. And when you do, I hope you'll remember this moment, not because of me, but because your father never gave up on you. The girl's lips curved into a shy smile. I will, she said softly. The man's heart softened even more. He had spent years building empires, earning respect and wealth, but this moment felt more meaningful than any deal he had ever signed. This wasn't charity. This was an investment in a future that would change lives. He returned to his desk, grabbed a folder, and handed it to the father. Inside were documents outlining the full scholarship, along with a letter offering him a stable position at one of the man's companies, a chance for him to work fewer hours with better pay, so he could spend more time with his daughter. The father's hands trembled as he held the papers. You do this for us? The man nodded. You reminded me of where I came from. I see myself in you, and I see the future in her. The world needs children like her, and fathers like you. For the first time in years, the father felt seen, respected, and valued. Tears slid down his cheeks, but he didn't care. He stood and placed a hand over his heart, whispering, Thank you. Thank you so much. The man smiled softly. No need to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Never stop believing in her. Keep teaching her, guiding her. She's a light in this world. The father nodded firmly. I will. That day, they walked out of the office building with more hope than they had ever felt. The man watched them leave from his window, a thoughtful expression on his face. He had come into that hotel ballroom last night as a man of wealth and status, but he left as a man reminded of humility, kindness, and the power of education. And though the father and daughter didn't fully realize it yet, their lives had just taken a turn that would change everything. Months passed, and life slowly began to change for the father and his little girl. What once felt like a distant dream was now their new reality. The mornings were no longer rushed with exhaustion, and the evenings were no longer filled with worry over unpaid bills. For the first time in years, their tiny home felt lighter, warmer, and full of hope. The little girl had started at one of the best international schools in the city. At first, she felt shy, stepping into classrooms filled with children from wealthy families, dressed in expensive clothes. But the moment she opened her mouth and introduced herself in multiple languages, every head in the room turned in awe. Her teachers were astonished by her ability, and her classmates, instead of teasing her, admired her talent. She had quickly become the pride of her school. Her father's life had changed too. No longer working as a janitor, he now had a stable job at one of the businessman's companies. The hours were reasonable, the pay enough to cover their needs, and most importantly, he had time to walk his daughter to school every morning, time to help her with homework, and time to simply sit with her and laugh like they used to. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, replaced by a look of quiet confidence. Despite the changes, nothing about their hearts had shifted. Their home was still modest, their routine still simple, but gratitude filled every corner. The father continued to encourage his daughter's love for learning. He would still sit with her at night, even though she now had access to tutors and endless resources. Knowledge is a treasure, he often reminded her. But your kindness is what makes you truly special. The man who had once mocked them, the wealthy businessman, had become more than just a sponsor. He visited often, not out of obligation, but because he found peace in their company. For years, his life had been full of formalities, meetings, and luxury, but there was something about this small family that reminded him of his own beginnings. He would sit at their kitchen table, enjoying a simple meal, and watch the girl excitedly talk about all the new words she had learned that day. Each visit softened him, grounding him in a way his wealth never could. One evening, months after their lives had changed, the girl stood on stage at a school event, confidently delivering a speech in 4 different languages. Parents and teachers applauded loudly, many moved to tears. Among them sat her father, his hands clasped tightly, pride shining in his eyes. The businessman was there too, clapping with a smile that was genuine, not the polite kind he used in boardrooms. As the applause filled the room, the little girl scanned the crowd and locked eyes with her father. She gave him a shy smile and he waved back, tears threatening to fall. In that moment, he realized everything he had endured. The long nights, the exhaustion, the humiliation had been worth it. His little girl was no longer just his pride. She was a beacon of hope, proof that dreams could come true even in the most unlikely circumstances. After the event, as they walked home under the glow of the streetlights, the little girl squeezed her father's hand. "Baba," she whispered, "do you think I can really see the world one day?" He looked down at her, his heart swelling. "My star," he said softly, "you're already lighting it up." She giggled and leaned against him as they walked, her head resting on his arm. The streets were quiet, but inside, both of them felt a peace they hadn't known before. At his apartment window, the businessman watched them disappear into the night, a thoughtful smile on his face. He had given them opportunities, but what they had given him was far greater, a reminder of humility, kindness, and the value of family. For all his wealth, he had never felt as rich as he did in that moment. Their story spread quietly, touching those who heard it. Some people were inspired by the little girl's brilliance. Others were moved by her father's sacrifice. But for them, it wasn't about recognition or fame. It was simply a story of love, hard work, and the belief that no dream is too big, no matter where you come from. Years later, people would remember the girl who spoke 9 languages, the humble father who never gave up, and the powerful man whose cold smile had turned warm because of them. But for now, as they walked hand in hand under the stars, they were just a father and daughter, grateful, happy, and ready to face the future together.